Hello everyone, welcome to this new session. So, in this, we will be studying some idioms and basically learn them through understanding what their origin is. The first word is aback or taken aback, which means to be shocked or surprised. In the days of sailing ships, if the wind unexpectedly whipped the huge sails back against the mast, the ship was taken aback. That is, its progress was abruptly halted. This could happen either through faulty steering or shift change in wind direction. The shock involved relates now to a person's reaction when suddenly stopped by a piece of news or surprising event. A short distance down the unfrequented lane, the Prime Minister's car was suddenly held up by a band of masked men. The chauffeur, momentarily taken aback, jammed on the brakes. By Agatha Christie. I say I can help. I'd like to. Willie was quite taken aback at being asked. Michelle Moore again. He wasted no time with social necessities, asking her immediately how many times she had tried to commit suicide. She was taken aback, but her reply was equally forthright 4 or 5 times. By Andrew Morton. Above board, to be honest and straight. If a business deal is above board, it is honest and would bear the scrutiny of all concerned. The phrase is said to refer to the dishonest practice of gamesters who would drop their hands below the board or the table to exchange unfavorable cards, games played with the hands above board. Removed at least that weapon from the cheater's armory. Nowadays, when young women go about in kilts and are as barebacked as wild horses, there's no excitement. The cards are all on the table. Nothing's left to fancy. All's above board and consequently boring. By Andrew Huxley. Sorry. Hmm. I shall keep inside the gates so no one can say I've driven on the public roads without a license. Everything above board. That's my motto. John Wayne. Next is Achilles' Heel. Achilles' heel. A weak or vulnerable spot in something or someone which is otherwise strong. According to Greek mythology, Thetis held her young son Achilles by the heel while wiping him into a river Styx to make him invulnerable. Achilles' heel, however, remained dry and was his only weakness after years as a brave and invincible warrior. Achilles was killed during the Trojan War by an arrow which pierced his heel. His deadly enemy, Paris, had learned of his secret and aimed at the weak spot. The full story is told in the Homer's Iliad. A social climber can ill afford an Achilles' heel, and this particular weakness on Hutchins' part would probably be disastrous to him sooner or later. By John Wayne. As in the quotation, there may be no apostrophe. Most people would insert one, however, originally used by people and their character. It may now be applied to projects and plans. Literary. Feet of clay. Figurative use is only. See also feet of clay. Feet of clay. A fundamental flaw or weakness in a person otherwise revered. Feet of clay. Figurative use is only 100 years old. If something survives the acid test, it has been proven true beyond the shadow of doubt. A treatment accorded Russia by his sister nation in the months to come will be the acid test of their goodwill by Woodrow Wilson. Usage is bordering on a cliche. Hmm. Alright. Adam's ale or water. Adam's ale is water, this being all that Adam had to drink in Eden. The phrase is thought to have been introduced by the Puritans. Hayman's Son refers to a work by Prion entitled Sovereign Power of Parliament in 1643 to support his theory. A cup of cold Adam from the next purling brook by Thomas Brown. Adam's ale about the only gift that has descended undefiled from the Garden of Eden by Emery. Usage is literary and jocular. I think I missed Adam acid test, a foolproof test for assessing the value of something. A sure way to find out whether a metal was pure gold was to test it with aquafortis. Fortis. What is an aquafortis? The name for nitric acid. It literally translates to strong water, in Latin reflecting corrosive nature and ability to react with many metals, including silver, which is why it was considered strong. Nitric acid, chemical acid or aquafortis, has chemical formula HNO3. Corrosive nature, aquafortis is highly corrosive and toxic, strong acid. But gold remains unaffected. Although the original acid test has been known for centuries, the phrase is in figurative use it only 100 years ago. Alright, cool. Having the nose adjusted and secured by tightening above his Adam's apple. Adam's ale is we have done, but Adam's apple no. So sorry, I'm kind of confusing. Adam's apple. The lump of the fore part of the throat, which is especially visible in men. The Adam's apple is a thyroid cartilage which appears as a lump in the throat. It is said to be there as a reminder that in the biblical story of Garden of Eden, Adam ate the apple, forbidden apple, a piece of which became lodged in his throat. Having the noose adjusted, the secured by tightening above the Adam's apple. Daily Telegraph. Add insult to injury. To upset someone and then deliver a second insult to make an already bad situation worse by second insulting act or remark. Some authorities claim a very ancient origin for this phrase, tracing it back to a book of fables by the Roman writer Herodotus. From about 25th century. The fable in question is the bald man and the fly. Herodotus. In which a man attempts to squash an insect which has just stung him on his bald patch by delivering a smart smack. The fly escapes the blow and mocks him for wanting to avenge the bite of a tiny insect with the death. To the injury of the sting, he has only succeeded in adding the insult of the self inflicted blow. Other authorities, however, point out that in the past centuries, while injury certainly meant physical hurt, it could also equally well apply to wounded feelings, as was synonymous with insult. French injure, from the Latin origin inuria, has today the predominant sense of insult, abuse. The effect is therefore to intensify the original injury by adding insult to insult. And now insult was added to injury. The Queen of French wrote her a formal letter calmly announcing as a family event in which she was sure Victoria would be interested the marriage of her son, Montpensa, by Lytton Strachey. In an insolent proclamation from Lausanne, General Rapp added insult to injury by telling the heirs of 1,000 years of ordered liberty that the history showed that they could not settle their affairs without the intervention of France, by Sir Arthur Bryant. The next word is alive and kicking. Very active and lively. This is one of those expressions that lend themselves to imaginative interpretation. Part Right, 1940, suggests that it is a fish's vendor called to advertise his ware, whereas the fish are so fresh that they are still jumping and flapping about. Another authority says it refers to the months of a pregnancy following quickening, um, when the mother is able to feel the child she is carrying moving in her womb. The universe isn't machine after all. It's alive and kicking. That in spite of the fact that the man with his cleverness has discovered some of the habits of our old earth, the old demon isn't quite named. D.H. Lawrence. I suppose if I died, you would cry a bit. That would be nice of you and very proper. But I'm alive and kicking. Don't you find me rather a nuisance? Some sort. Usage is colloquial. Amok. To run an amok. To be frenzied out of control. The phrase comes from the Malayan word amok, which describes the behavior of tribesmen who, perhaps under the influence of opium, would work themselves into a murderous frenzy and lash out at anyone they came across. On its first introduction in the 17th century, there were varying spellings. The amok became the accepted form until well traveled writers of this century popularized the spelling amok, A-M-O-C-K, A-M-O-K, sorry. They were accused of effectively showing off their knowledge of source language. Nowadays, either spelling is acceptable. So that when the policeman arrived and found me running amok with the SIG, but apparently without provocation, it was rather difficult to convince him that I wasn't tight. P.G. Wodehouse. To write like an angel. To have beautiful handwriting, to be a gifted writer of prose or poetry. Isaac D. Israeli gives the origin of the expression in Curiosities of Literature. There is a strange phrase connected with the art of calligrapher, which I think may be found in almost, if not at all, if not in all, modern languages, to write like an angel. Ladies have frequently been compared with angels. They are beautiful as angels and sing and dance like angels. But however intelligible these are, we do not so easily connect pensmanship with other celestial accomplishments. The fanciful phrase, however, has a very human origin. Among those learned Greeks who immigrated to Italy and some afterwards into France, In the reign of Francis I was one Angelo Vergetto, whose beautiful calligraphy excited the administration of learned. The French monarch had a Greek found cast modelled by the writing. The learned Henry Stephens, who was one of the most elegant writers of Greek, had learned the practice from Angelo. His name becomes synonymous with beautiful writings, and it gave birth to the phrase write like an angel. From the explanation, it is evident that the phrase is descriptive not of a person's style of writing, but of his handwriting. The critic therefore shows a modern shift of meaning for idioms. Telltale cliches: she writes like an angel, it is usually a she. William Trevor is an exception. This means almost nothing, except that the critic doesn't really know what else to say. I've probably done it myself, used about Anita Bruckner, Hilary Mantel, Elizabeth Smart, Penelope Fitzgerald, Mary Wellesley, A.L. Barker. Here lies poet Goldsmith for shortness and called Noll, who wrote like an angel but talked like poor Paul, by David Garrick. Angels to be on the side of angels. To agree with the great and the good, the orthodox authorities. The phrase is from the speech given by Benjamin Disraeli at Oxford in 1864. Addressing the vexed issue of evolution, Disraeli declared himself opposed to the theory that our early ancestors were apes and maintained that man was descended from God. Is man an ape or an angel? I, my lord, am on the side of the angels. He had an idea that by bawling and behaving offensively, he was defending art against the Philistines. Tipsy, he felt himself arrayed on the side of angels, of Baudelaire, of Edgar Allan Poe, of De Quincey against the dull, unspiritual mob by Aldous Huxley. He will flit through eternity not as an enchain and jangle, perhaps, but as a mischievous cherub in a top hat. He is cherub enough, already, always, to be on the side of the angels. By Robert Lind. The war brought its dividends, however. Iran and Syria, the two key players in the hostage saga, who had been regarded as virtual international pharaohs of their links with terrorism and had no diplomatic relations with Britain, found themselves back on the side of the angels in the Sunday Times. Next up is Apple of Discord. Discord. Something which causes strife, argument, rivalry. In a fit pique because she had not been invited to the marriage of Tethys and Peleus, Eris, the god of discord, threw a golden apple bearing the inscription, "For the most beautiful among the goddess." Pallas, Hera, and Aphrodite each claimed the apple, and a bitter quarrel ensued. Paris, who was chosen to judge between them, decided upon Aphrodite, whereupon Pallas and Hera. Pallas. Pallas and Hera swore vengeance upon him and were instrumental in bringing about the fall of Troy. In the letter was a long contemplated apple of discord, and much her hand trembled as she handed the documents up to him, by Thomas Hardy. The apple of discord had indeed been dropped into the house of Milborne's Thomas Hardy. Usage infrequent with a literary feel. Apple one's eye. Apple of eye. Someone who is much loved and protected. Originally, because its shape, the apple was a metaphor for the pupil of the eye, and one's eyesight is precious, so is the person described as the apple of one's eye. The phrase, as we use it today, is a literal translation of a Hebrew expression that occurs 5 times in the Old Testament. The earliest reference is Deuteronomy 32:10 before 1000 BC. Through the immense influence of 1611 authorized version of the Bible, it has become common in English of recent centuries. Incidentally, there is some doubt that the original Hebrew word "tapor" actually means apple. Perhaps we should be referring to the apricot, Chinese citron, or Chinese citron, Chinese citron, or quince of one's eyes. Quince of eyes. Quince of eye. What is an idiom? Language follows rules. If it does not, then its users would not be able to make sense of random utterances they read or heard. They would not be able to communicate meaningfully themselves. Grammar books are, in effect, an account of the regularities of language, with notes on the minority of cases where there are exceptions to the regular patterns. Nearly all verbs, for example, as is in the third person singular present tense, he walks, she throws, it appeals. There is always exception to the basic rule he can, she may, it ought. One of the interesting things about idiom is that they are anomalies of language, maverick of the linguistic world. The very word idiom comes from Greek idios. One's own peculiar, strange idioms therefore break the normal rules. They do this in two main areas: semantically, with regard to their meaning, and syntaxically, with regard to their grammar. A consideration then of the semantic and the syntactic elements of idioms leads to answer to the question, what is an idiom? Meaning. The problem with idioms is that the word in them do not mean what they ought to do. An idiom cannot be understood literally. A bucket and a pail. To kick means to move with foot. Yet to kick the bucket probably does not mean to move a pail with one's foot. It is likely to be understood as to die. Kick the bucket. The meaning of the whole, then, is not the sum of the meaning of the parts, but is something apparently quite unconnected to them. To put this another way, idioms are mostly phrases that can have literal meanings in the context but a total different sense in another. If someone said Alfred spilled the beans all over the table, there would be a nasty mess for him to clear up. If it were Alfred spilled the beans all over the town, he would be divulging secrets to all who would listen. An idiom breaks the normal rules. Then, in that, it does not mean what you would expect it to mean. In fact, the idiom is a new linguistic entity with a sense attached to it that may be quite remote from the senses of individual words that forms it. Although it is from a phrase, it has many of the characteristics of a single word. Grammar. The second major way in which idioms are peculiar is with regard to their grammar. There is no idiom that does not have some syntactic defect that fails to undergo some grammatical operation that is syntactic structure would suggest it. is appropriate. Different types of idioms suffer from different restrictions. With a hot dog, the following are not possible. The dog is hot, the heat of the dog, today's dog is hotter than yesterday's. It's a very hot dog today. Yet, with a superficially identical phrase, a hot sun, there is no problem. The sun is hot. The heat of the sun, today's sun is hotter than yesterday's. It's a very hot sun today. Idioms that include verbs are similarly inflexible in the manipulations that they will permit. For instance, why is that you can't take the separate parts of to beat about the bush and substitute for them a near synonym? There is no way you can say hit about the bush or beat about the shrub. Nor can you change the definite article to the indefinite. You can't beat about a bush. It's not possible to make bush plural. Who ever heard of beating about bushes? The bush was beaten about is as strange as the passive as the music was faced. Some idioms go further, exhibiting a completely idiosyncratic grammatical structure such as intransitive verb, apparently with a direct object to come, a cropper to go the whole dog, hog to look daggers at. The best example of idioms, therefore, are very fixed grammatically, and it is possible to guess their meanings from the sense of the words that constitute them. Not all phrases these stringent criteria. Quite often, it is possible to see the link between the literal sense of the words and the idiomatic meaning. It is because a route by which many phrases become idioms involve a metaphorical stage where the original references are still discernible. To skate on thin ice, to quote danger, is a very obvious figure of speech. The borderline between metaphor and idiom is a fuzzy one. Other idioms allow a wide range of grammatical transformations. My father read the riot act to me when I arrived. Can become I was read the riot act by my father when I arrived, or the riot act was read to me by my father when I arrived. Much more acceptable than the bush was beaten about. In short, it is not a phrase, is or not an idiom, rather, given expression is more or less idiomatically on incline stretching from the normal literal use of the language via degrees of metaphors and grammatical flexibility to the pure idiom. To take an analogy in the color spectrum, there is general agreement on what is green and what is yellow, but it is impossible to say precisely where one becomes the other. So it is hard to specify where the flexible metaphor becomes synaptically frozen idiom with a new meaning all its own. George was the apple of his father's eye. He did not like Harry, his second son, so well. Somerset Maugham, Adam, the apple of her eye. Headline Mid Success Times. Next word is apple pie order in. Where there is uncertainty, with everything neatly arranged in its proper place. Where there is uncertainty, the suggestions proliferate. For this phrase, there is a veritable smorgasbord of international choice, French, Greek, and American origins. Are the main theories. Two folks' corruptions are suggested from the French. The idea of the old French capapae, meaning clothed in armor from head to foot, is that of an immaculately ordered and fully equipped soldier. Other researchers, Brewer included, suggest the idiom may come from the phrase nappe pile, folded linen, which conveys the idea of neatness and tidiness. In the 19th century, a learned discussion and notes and queries concluded that in apple pie order was corruption of in apple beta order. Example, as well ordered as letters of the Greek alphabet. Our transatlantic cousins have also tried to lay claim to the phrase by tracing its origin to New England, where it is said the housewives made pie of unbelievable neatness, taking much time and trouble to cut the apples into the even slices before arranging them just so, layer upon perfect layer in the crust. New England story may be true. The colonial women may indeed have had nothing more worthwhile to do than make pattern with the pie filling that the phrase was current in Britain long before it was in America and belongs to the British. Susan replied that her aunt wanted to put up the house on apple pie order. The hall, drawing room, and dining room, everything was always gleaming and solidly an apple pie order in the right place by David Granite. Usage: apple pie may be hyphenated. See also spink and span and ship shape and Bristol fashion. Ship shape, Bristol fashion. Apple pie bed. A practical joke in which a bed is made using only one sheet, folded over part way down the bed, thus preventing the would be occupant from stretching out. The phrase may be folk corruption from the French napapelle, folded cloth. Alternatively, the expression may well refer to an apple turnover, whichever is a folded piece of pastry, just as the sheet is folded over the bed, with an apple filling in the middle. No boy in any school could have more liberty, even when all noblemen's sons are allowed to make apple pie beds for their masters. R.E. Blackmore, restricted to a context where schoolboy drapes are the norms. Anguer, well, ill, too. To be good, bad, sign for future. See under the auspices of Bradford Grammar School won the final of the Daily Mail under 15 Cup with a display of maturity which augurs well for the school's senior side. They beat King Edward VII, Latham St. Anne's 34 at Tickwim, conceding only one try. Cobalt Corpus. Auspices under the auspices of with the favor and support of a person or organization under the patronage or guidance. Auspices is made up of two Latin words, avis, a bird, and spere, to observe. In ancient Rome, it was customary to consult an augur or soothsayer before making weighty decisions. Affairs of the state and military campaigns were thus decided. The augur would interpret natural phenomena known in the trade of spices, such as a bird flight and bird song, and examine the entrails of victims offered for sacrifice. To make his predictions in war, only the commander in chief would have access to this military intelligence from his advisors, so any victory won by an officer of lower rank was gained under the good auspices of his commander. The expression augur well and augur ill have the same origin. The French dispute therefore boils down to a straight decision between our right to teach untaught in English and the French right to set their own teaching standard. Sidestep this dilemma. A small but increasing number of British instructors are taking the French exam and then teaching English clients under the auspices of École des Ski Français. We can telegraph. Sunday's Oliver Awards under the auspices of the Society of West End Theatre round of Thespian prize giving season, Matt Wolf argues that the ground rules need to be clarified. The Times. The mere knowledge that Americans under the auspices of the UN were serious would in any case probably be sufficient to stop the majority of the fighting. Usage generally return except in radio or television, uh, TV journalism. Also, augur well, augur ill. Owl. Oh, to take leave without permission, an acronym for absent without leave. Rees rests that during the American Civil War, any soldier who absented himself without permission was forced to wear a placard bearing the inscription "All." During the First World War, it was used to describe a soldier who was not present for roll call but was not yet classified as a deserter. At the time, the four letters were pronounced individually, but sometimes before the Second World War, the pronunciation "Eol" became current. According to Kobe, thousands of servicemen and women are now absent without leave at all. Ill. For them, one recourse is to seek sanctuary, a place of refuge from the authorities while considering their options. Global Corpus. The troops went ill to express their complaints about food, work, and leave. Cobalt corpus usage. Older usage inserts full stop between each letters to indicate the abbreviation. This is progressively less common practice. The acronym itself is nearly always written in capitals, not in lowercase characters. It can now be applied to a range of situations such as absent husbands, missing office workers, etc. Axe to grind. To have a selfish, usually secret motive for doing something to insist upon one's own fixed belief or course of action. All the authorities are agreed that the phrase originates in a moral tale of a boy who is flattered by a stranger into sharpening his axe for him. The problem comes in deciding which story and which author. The OED and the most etymologists ascribe the phrase to American diplomat Benjamin Franklin in the article entitled Too Much for Your Whistle. His early career was that of a journalist. The story concerns a young man who wants his whole axe as shiny as the cutting edge the smith agrees to do it, provided that the man turns the grindstone himself. Of course, he soon tires and gives up, realizing he has a bitten off more than he can chew. A similar story, Who'll Turn the Grindstone, is popularly associated with Franklin. However, it was published some 20 years after his death and was in fact written by Charles Minor. There is doubt as to its place of publication. Some say in Lutheran Federalist of 7/9/1810, others in Wigglesbury Glenore of Pennsylvania in 1811. The story itself clearly draws on Franklin's tale. It is about poor Robert who was talked into turning the grindstone for a man wanting to sharpen his axe. The story continues. Trickled with the flattery like a little fool, I went to work and bitterly did I rue the day. It was a new axe, and I toiled and tugged till I was almost tired to death. The school bell rang. The I could not get away. My hands were blistered, and it was not half ground. At length, however, the axe was sharpened, and the man turned to me with, "Now, you little rascal, you've played the truant. Scoot to school, or you'll rue it." Alas, though it was hard enough to turn grindstone this cold day. But now, to be called little rascal was too much. It sunk deep in my mind, and often I thought of it since. Poor Robert concludes with a moral about over politeness and excessive persuasion. When I see a merchant over polite to his customers, begging them to taste a little brandy and throwing half his goods on the counter, thinks I, that man has an axe to grind. The true originator of the phrase is undoubtedly Charles Minor, not Benjamin Franklin. The first essential is to examine the source of the testimony. Did the person reporting the fact observe it himself? If so, was he in a position to observe accurately? Had he any motive for reporting falsely or for embellishing what he saw? Was he a credulous person or a trained scientist? Had he an axe to grind, or was he propagandist by idle greed? You may fear that I am about to use my column inches as a whole stone on which to grind a private axe, but I can assure you that so far as I can remember, I have no personal reason to dislike this ludicrous figure by Daily Telegraph. The usage. The contemporary sense emphasizes making sure one's own fixed selfish ideas or plans are victorious. When used with a negative, as is often the case, the meaning is impartial, neutral. He made the perfect chairman, as he had no axe to grind. The original American spelling of axe is always angelized. See also, to have a bee in one's bonnet. Backroom boys. Researchers, scientists whose hard work is essential but is not brought to public attention. Oh. The phrase was coined by Lord Beaverbrook, the British Minister for Aircraft Production, in a speech in honor of the unsung heroes of the war efforts made on March 24th, 1941. To whom must praise be given, I will tell you. It is the boys in the back room. They do not sit in the limelight, but they are the men who do the work. The other detective said, "We have got evidence you don't know about yet. You'd be surprised at what the backroom boys can do." I said, What's that supposed to mean? And he replied, "You'll find out." The first evidence that the backroom boys had been active came back when he heard from Mr. Beltrami that the police were claiming to have found pieces of paper there. Cobbled, corpus, usage usually plural. One of the backroom boys, rather than the simple "a backroom boy," is more natural singular form. Backroom is normally one word, unhyphenated. We'll just stop here.